Hello Naughty Steppers. Now before I proceed with the review today, I would like to mention that all of the proceeds made from this EP in the first few weeks are going towards the RAIN organisation, a rape and sexual abuse helpline that aids survivors and their loved ones in dealing with events of this kind. So if you've got a couple of spare quid or dollars, then I urge you to purchase the EP at this early stage. I myself have done it. It's going towards something very worthwhile. So yeah, if you are able to, then make the difference whilst you can. And now, on with the review. What up, Naughty Steppers? Back with an EP review for the first time in what seems like a fair while. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the latest 5-track release from Jarvis for Firepower Records, Feel the Fire. Coming off the back of a very fruitful 2017, in which he released 2 EPs under the same label and received heaps of attention for his belting track Everybody Know Me alongside Tasoki. The BROSTEPper, also known as Cris Jarvis, can lay claim to be one of the mainstays of the genre, having released his first EP back in 2012. With a ton of releases up until this point for labels such as Play Me, Most Addictive and Kinphonic, ranging from singles to EPs and remixes, collaborating with the likes of Woolly and Code Pandorum along the way. Renowned for his epic, drawn-out approach to the BROSTEP format, bringing together a wealth of different vocals with electro synths and a truly fierce, varied dubstep technique. Back with his first EP since last July's Rise of the Phoenix, another 5 tracks to unleash to dubstep lovers the world over. And on the surface, what I'd say strikes me most about this latest collection from Jarvis is that it retains that classically invigorating feel that he's grown into more and more over the past few years. A real bite behind the grittier parts of these tracks that makes them hard to put down for any fan of this genre. Interestingly enough, this comes at first in the introduction to the EP and not with the first drop. Jarvis being someone who has definitely dabbled in his fair share of airy, spacey, outer-worldly introductions in the past few releases. But in this opener, he teams up with Spaghetti to ensure that the project really kicks off on the front foot. A wonderfully insistent and punchy opening sequence, seizing the attention of the listener from the off, injecting a vim and vigour into those notes that lends a really purposeful energy to the overall sound. The isolation of which before the drop is a fantastic touch from the duo, creating that moment of reflection before cracking on with the carnage. This invigoration bleeds into pretty much every track on the EP, most notably again with the pointed opening to the 4th track, Hyper BROSTEP, which, the more I think about it, is such an appropriate name for the music that Jarvis makes. Like, it's definitely BROSTEP, but even that subgenre has taken its own directions over the past couple of years since the development of Rhythm. And Jarvis stands as arguably one of the only people still bringing that heightened and electrified take on the style to the table. And long may he carry on doing that, because it's probably my favourite kind of music. The way that it's so playful and uninhibited and adventurous while still packing that mighty punch, boxes which are all ticked in this EP. In a brief interview I did with him a couple of weeks ago on the process of making Feel the Fire, he mentioned how there wasn't anything that he didn't like about the production process. And hearing tunes of his like this makes me believe him more and more. Because who wouldn't have insane amounts of fun making music so clearly bereft of strict boundaries, especially in terms of sound? Obviously it adheres to the introduction, build and drop structure for the most part, but there's a variation to the dubstep that, whilst not unmatched, certainly goes beyond the norm. For example, on Raw to the Core, Jarvis combines very twisted and contorted sounds with a splash of triplet notes and tears as it progresses. Sounds that are given a further reach over time as they are put in a higher pitch and made quite jumpy towards the end, just so terrifying and raspy. This is also the case in the aforementioned first track, where him and Heady throw snarls and jabs and swipes all into the mix. An enthralling amalgamation of sounds that stands as a really good representation of their conjoined styles. The one track where the dubstep doesn't seem as varied is in the final and title track. At least in the first instance, where we are greeted by a succession of grisly stabbing notes that are undeniably frazzling in their design. Somewhat saving the introduction, because I'm not sure he gets the interaction between vocal and chords quite right here. The vocal is very nice in itself, and especially as an endpoint for the EP, referencing the title through its lyrics, but I don't feel like the chemistry between that and what backs it, the electro synths that Jarvis delves into every now and then, is quite there. But standing as arguably the most intriguing track of the bunch is the one bereft of a truly dubstep feel, and that's the middle song, Ma Creep, alongside vocalist Maxim. A gloomy direction change which sets the scene very well with a tense and suspenseful opening sequence. The cleverness of this track coming in its creation of an uncertainty as to whether this is going to lead towards a more fleshed out introduction or a drop. And the fact that it's the former actually poses as a very chilled midway take on his style with no overt heaviness to it, its eeriness lulling you into a trance at points. All the while Maxim coming through with a very matter-of-fact and genuine vocal, my favourite part of which being when he's rapping about time, with the instrumental sounding like a chiming, ticking clock. In reference to what I said earlier, this track is an example of Jarvis going beyond that introduction, build and drop structure. It just keeps plugging away, more like a stream of consciousness sort of song, providing that moment of relative ease in leading fantastically from the jagged flow of Raw to the core, where the vocal falls perfectly over that skittish backdrop, and leading on to Hyper BROSTEP, which I must say has one of the most stunning vocals I've heard in a BROSTEP song in a long time. Very innocent and vulnerable, searching for something that it can't quite reach, just very moving. I honestly can't believe that someone hasn't used this before, it's just beautiful. And actually a really powerful contrast with the hilarious sample used at the start, in which the person speaking blames themselves for BROSTEP and then says they hate it resultantly. Why, bro? What you got against BROSTEP, bro? What's BROSTEP ever done to you, bro? Come on, bro, just be a bro about it, bro. But nah, having the comical nature of that pitted against the insecurity of the main sample works very well, flipping the track on its head mood-wise in no time. To be honest, the vocal samples throughout are very on point and catchy, as is the case usually with Jarvis. Something a little bit too classic about some of them, like in Hyper BROSTEP with the fat man scoop voice cut up just before the drop. But across the board there are some really moment-making vocal touches to give the EP that extra flair overall. Sticking with Hyper BROSTEP briefly, I do feel like there were a couple of drops in these tracks where a little bit more possibly could have been added in. Maybe experimentation with the tempo could have been had to accommodate for some wilder sounds, as is the case in the opener with that spag-heady influence. But more of note in this EP is the variation in dubstep sounds on show, something that Jarvis has become increasingly astute at over the last few releases. And more importantly than anything else, he is making that Hyper BROSTEP sound that I can't say too many are at current, and for that alone he is a keeper in my book. Providing a wealth of powerful and impactful moments across the 5 tracks, giving the EP a serious glow and appeal as a whole. Even though I can't say that I love any of the tracks from start to finish, the fact that there are parts or aspects of every song that I love speaks volumes for its quality. Whether it's the isolation at the end of the first track, first with the subnotes, then with the original notes, minus the vocal, to give them a bigger presence in the song at its close. The progression beyond the midsection of the second, hinting at finishing early, before Jarvis shows us that he has other ideas. It just keeps on giving. The uncertainty of the third track in not knowing at first what direction it will go off in. The mesmeric use of the vocal sample in the fourth, which really comes into its own after the first drop, layered over that feathery bass. And the delay of the final drop on the EP in the title track, another time-stopping moment before slamming back into the filth, unexpected and brilliant. Not to mention the revival of Jarvis's recently formed Rebirth theme in that final track, with the lyrics at the very start and then ending the EP with the sounds of fire, from which the phoenix will rise once again. And beyond these moments, it's the length of the EP that makes it such a solid project. I love how he hasn't settled in the recent past for the more standard 4-track EP release, with each of the last 3 coming in at 5 tracks. A sure sign of someone who is willing to push his sound, his ideas, his style that little bit further, which you have to admire. With that hyper approach as pervasive as ever throughout, something which I for one am very grateful for in the face of the recent Riddim influx. And before any of you jump on the bandwagon and say, how can you not like Riddim? I'm not saying that. I like Riddim, just not as much as BROSTEP. Thank you very much. Now, in terms of a favourite from the EP, I think I'd have to go with Hyper BROSTEP. For me, it's the most memorable, not only for its title and that amazing vocal sample, but also for the way in which it accesses the most sides of Jarvis's production. The funny opening sample, punchy opening, distorted dubstep, all staples of his sound. And in terms of a recommendation, if you enjoyed this EP, then I would go with all of the old Barely Alive stuff. I thought for a long time about any sort of comparisons I could draw here with other artists, but honestly, I feel like that stuff bears the closest resemblance to this EP. And Jarvis's music overall, to be honest. Just before I crack on with the outro, massive thanks to Cris for sending this EP over to me a few weeks prior to its release so that I could get a really good understanding of it before making this review. And so that is that for another review on the Nawtystep channel, this time of Jarvis's new EP on Firepower Records, Feel the Fire. Thank you very much, and as always, for tuning in. Like the video, share it about, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell along the way if you're enjoying the content so that you can be alerted whenever I upload to the Nawtystep channel. Also, be sure to leave a comment with your thoughts on Feel the Fire. What did you guys, the viewers, the listeners, make of it? Next to my head there should be a link to some other dubstep reviews on the channel, so check those out if you enjoyed this one. With that sole recommendation, all social media accounts, and that interview I did with Cris linked in the description box down below. And lastly guys, if it's naughty, then you know. So be sure, as always, to keep it naughty and stay safe. And I shall see you all in the next one. Peace out to all my fellow dark electronic music lovers.